Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2020 Honda Odyssey, we're going to be showing you how to install the Timbren rear suspension enhancement system. But before we do that, why don't we check it out and make sure that this is something that's going to work for you. These Odysseys are really capable vehicles and people use them to do a lot of different things, which does include towing some pretty heavy trailers and carrying around some pretty heavy loads. Well, the issue is with these vehicles, you got to find that happy medium, that balance of stability, but still be able to maintain comfort, when you're unloaded and just driving around town. I think they did a pretty good job there, but the issue is once you start getting some weight back here, it really affects both of them. The vehicle's not as stable and definitely not as comfortable. So using a suspension enhancement like the Timbren should correct that. And we're going to run through a few different tests and see if it really does help or really does work. So before we do those tests, what I like to do is just kind of get a baseline measurement of where our suspension is setting with all the factory components. So we have our vehicle unloaded. We'll just take a measurement here from the ground to the edge of the wheel well. Here at the back, that's right at 31 inches. And here at the front, take that same measurement. And from the ground to the edge of the wheel well, that's right at 30 3/4 of an inch. So now I went ahead, put a cargo carrier on the back of our Honda and put some weight on it. So I have some buckets full of sand. And if I had to guess, it's really not all that heavy, maybe 250 pounds, a rough estimate. And even with that amount of weight, you can see how it affected our Honda. The back of it is squatting down and the front end has lifted up a little bit. So to figure out exactly how much in this case, here at the back, from the ground to the edge of our wheel well, that's right at 29.5 inches. And here at the front, from the ground to the edge of our wheel well, that's going to be right at 31.5 inches. So if you guys have ever driven around like this before, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. How this weight affects the vehicle is quite negative, actually. The suspension, especially here in the rear, is working a lot harder to keep everything supported, so you're not going to have that smooth ride and you're going to wear out the components prematurely, over time. It doesn't just affect the back of your vehicle, though. It actually will affect the front of it as well. Since the front is a little bit higher up than its original ride height, what that's going to do is it can create uneven tire wear because the alignment now is changed and can affect that. And it can also affect your steering and your braking performance. Whenever the front end is not square to the ground, it's going to affect that, and you can definitely feel it whenever you're going down the road. But with that said, talking about it is one thing, but actually feeling it when you're driving is a whole different story. So let's go ahead, hop inside, take it for a spin, and see how it feels. So inside of our vehicle, we're gonna hit our test course. And before we even get started, just sitting in here, I can already feel that weight. I can feel the back squatting and the front is up a little bit higher. Definitely not the preferred way that I like to drive. With that said, I'm gonna go ahead and get started here. So first thing that we're going to do is go over some bumps and see how our suspension reacts with this weight. I like to kind of get going over a few of them, get some motion going in the vehicle before my opinion. And it's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but don't get me wrong. The suspension definitely could be a little more supportive, I feel like, more responsive almost. When we go over these bumps, you can feel the bump. And you can feel it takes a second to kind of want to get back to that original position. So although not as bad as I thought it was going to be, definitely some room for improvement. And with that said too, we don't have that much weight back there. I feel like if you're pulling a big trailer or had a lot more weight, that would definitely be amplified and a lot worse. So now we'll kind of do some evasive maneuvering, and this is what I'm really curious about. See if we get any body roll going on. I'll try to pick up some speed and make some sharp turns, and this is where you can definitely feel that weight. Kind of wanting to throw you around a little bit. You know, these cars actually drive pretty tight, and when I'm doing these turns like this, it just kind of takes a second to catch up, if that makes sense. So having a little extra support there definitely couldn't hurt. So now that we've driven around with the weight here at the back of our Odyssey without the Timbrens on, what I've done is installed them and loaded up the same amount of weight, and we can see if there's a difference. And right away, just from looking at it, I can tell the Odyssey is not squatting nearly as much. And with that said, why don't we go ahead and take those measurements again to see exactly how much it improved. So here at the back, go from the ground to the edge of the wheel well. That's right at 30.5 inches. So it is coming down a little bit from the original ride height, but much better than what it was without the Timbrens. And here at the front, go from the ground to the edge. See, that's going to be right at 31 inches. So it did come up a little bit. Pretty much the same deal with the back, but again, much better than what it was before without the Timbrens. But now that we have those measurements, you know, I'm excited to hop in, take it out for a spin again, and see how it feels. So hopped inside, go ahead, put it in drive, and go for a spin, and right away, before we even get going, it does feel better. It feels more level and more comfortable to drive. Yeah, so we'll see how this does here. We'll get going over our bumps again, just like last time. Really like to get some movement in the car, and it feels better, actually. Every bump we go over just feels a little more responsive and not as sloppy. You know, beforehand, you could really kind of feel the suspension working, and it feels a little more firm now. So don't get me wrong, you can still feel the weight back there, but it's a little better. I will say it kind of makes the ride a little more firm, if that makes sense. So it might take a little getting used to, but honestly, I think the trade-off is worth it because without the Timbrens, you know, you have that real soft ride and you're really working that suspension. So kind of get one or the other, and I think this is definitely the best option. All right, so again, we'll go through our slalom course here, pick up some speed, and this is where I'm really curious to see how these work here, because I've noticed in the past the body roll can get pretty bad, and these tend to help a lot, and definitely holds true. Definitely holds true. Honestly, you can't even really feel that weight at all back there. I kid you not. So everything feels planted, and it feels like, you know, wherever we point the wheel, that's where we're going to go. So now that we're done driving our Odyssey around out on the test course and seeing how the Timbrens feel, let's come underneath the vehicle and check them out, you know, kind of see how they work and how they look. So it's a super simple design and concept. More or less, these are just going to replace your factory jounce bumpers. These are going to be just a little bit taller, but that really doesn't make that big of a difference. What really makes a difference is the material that the Timbrens themselves are made from. The jounce bumper is actually really soft. It doesn't take much effort to, you know, compress it. And essentially, these aren't really there to give us any support. These are more or less just here to prevent our suspension from bottoming out. And that's where that's the difference between the Timbren. You know, it's a harder bumper, and whenever we have that weight compressed on it, it's actually going to support that load as opposed to just kind of crunching down and preventing it from bottoming out. So that's where the extra stability comes from. So these are going to have a 3,500 pound weight capacity, and keep in mind that's not going to add to the weight carrying capacity of your Odyssey. All right, that's just how much weight these can support. Now, as far as the installation goes, really not too bad. Since they do replace those factory jounce bumpers, Really not a whole lot to them. Don't really need a whole lot of crazy tools or anything like that. I will say probably the trickiest part is getting them to press in there. So you might need a few different shapes and blocks of wood to wedge in there and get them to press. But as long as you stay patient, really shouldn't give you a whole lot of issues. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and put them on together now. To begin our installation, you're first going to want to get your vehicle in the air. So if you're at home, you can use a jack and jack stands, and you want to jack it up by the frame. All right, that way when the wheels come off the ground, the suspension is going to be unloaded and we're going to have a big gap there. The wheels will be hanging down as far as possible and give us that room that we need to work. What we need to do is remove the factory jounce bumper, which is this component right here. Now these are just pressed into this arm. So what you need to do is lubricate them. I just use penetrating oil. You can use soapy water, a combination of both, whatever you might have, just to help everything come out easier. So a few different ways, really no special way to get these out. What I like to do is take a pry bar. You can use a big screwdriver as well and just start to work it out. They are going to be pretty tight, so it might take a little bit of effort to kind of work everything out. Usually once it's kind of loose, you can take a hammer, kind of point that pry bar up at an angle, and work that jounce bumper out. So I'll grab it, kind of give you an idea. You can see this portion here has an angle, and that's what was keeping it pressed inside there. All we're gonna have to do now is take our new Timbren, and this is simply just gonna get pressed in and replace our factory jounce bumper. Now, just kind of a pointer, make sure these are well lubricated, make it go in a lot easier. And what you can do, if I had to guess, it would probably make things go together a little bit better, is actually take this and maybe a few hours before you actually install these, maybe just pop this in your freezer, and with it being cool in there, that will make everything more dense and should decrease the overall diameter of this just a little bit. And sometimes that can make a big difference on how easy things go in. But with that said, we'll get it lined up, and chances are pretty good you're not going to be able to push this in by hand. But we'll get it lined up, and then what we can do is come back and take a block of wood or something similar and put it in between the frame rail on this, and then if you lower the vehicle down, the two are going to compress, and we'll use the vehicle's own weight to push our Timbren in. This is a setup that I'm going to use to get the Timbren pressed in. It's just a 2x4 piece that I cut to fill that void in between the top of the Timbren and the bottom of our frame. I made it big enough to where it's a little tight, there's a little pressure there, and now when we lower the vehicle, when the tire hits the ground, it's going to push these components up into the block. The frame's going to prevent it from moving, which is going to force the Timbren into the cup here.
Oh, yeah.
So I tried to press this in using the smaller block that we talked about with no success. It just kept kind of popping out and not pressing down on the Timbren good enough. So it's pretty normal. You're going to have to try a couple different techniques and kind of what you have laying around the house to get this done. So we're going to change things up a bit. This time I have a larger piece of wood to give it some more surface area. Kind of jammed it in there, and again, we'll go ahead, lower it down until we get this to go in place. So that larger block actually worked really well. This is pressed in there, but just for good measure, I'd like to do it one more time just to be 100% sure that everything's in there nice and tight. This time what I'm going to do is just take that factory jounce bumper and put it upside down. Actually just jam it in between the Timbren and the bottom of our frame. And I feel like this ought to work pretty good. Put equal pressure on everything, just kind of how it's set up here. So with that, like so, we'll go ahead, put some weight on it again, and I think we'll be good to go. All right, so that seemed to work out pretty well. This thing is in there nice and tight and secure. Now all that's left to do is simply repeat this same exact process over on the other side of our vehicle. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Timbren rear suspension enhancement system on our 2020 Honda Odyssey.